There is a conversation that happens in Britain with remarkable regularity. It happens on Monday mornings in offices. It happens in pubs on Saturday evenings. It happens at family gatherings, at school gates, at work lunches, at the kind of social occasions where people are still figuring out what they have in common. Someone mentions the match. Someone else has an opinion. The conversation finds its footing. And somewhere in the room, there is a person who has nothing to contribute. Who didn't watch? Who doesn't follow a team? Who cannot, if pressed, tell you the current Premier League table or name the starting 11 of any club with any confidence? That person has learned, usually through years of quiet experience, exactly how to navigate this moment. The vague nod. The subject change. The careful non-answer that neither admits indifference nor fabricates enthusiasm. The performance of mild awareness that costs nothing and reveals nothing. Because in Britain, not caring about football is not a neutral position. It is a social fact that requires management. Today we're going to talk about why. And more importantly, we're going to talk about what the psychology and neuroscience actually say about people who don't obsess over football, because what the science says is considerably more interesting than the cultural story suggests. Let's start with what football actually is, at a psychological level. Not what it looks like from the outside, 22 people and a ball, but what it does inside the brains of the people who love it. Human beings are tribal by nature. This is not a metaphor. For the overwhelming majority of human evolutionary history, group membership was the difference between survival and death. Your tribe fed you, protected you, defended you, kept you alive. The neurological systems that evolved to support tribal belonging, the capacity to identify with a group, to feel its fortunes as your own, to experience genuine emotion at its victories and defeats, those systems are ancient and they are powerful. They did not disappear when we built cities and stopped hunting. Football, at its psychological core, is one of the most efficient modern activations of those ancient systems. The club is the tribe. The colors are the marking. The season is the shared narrative that binds the community across time. When a supporter says we were robbed on Saturday, they are not speaking loosely. Their brain has genuinely incorporated the club into their identity. The club's history is, neurologically speaking, part of their history. Its defeats are registered as personal losses. Its triumphs release the same neurochemicals as personal achievements. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with anticipation, reward, and motivation, is central to this experience. Neuroscience research consistently demonstrates that uncertain rewards produce stronger dopamine responses than predictable ones. The fact that you don't know what's going to happen, that a single moment can change everything, that the last 5 minutes of a match can undo or redeem 90, is precisely what makes the experience so neurologically compelling. The unpredictability is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. It is what makes it addictive in the most literal, neurochemical sense. So why doesn't this happen for you? Research examining dopamine receptor gene variations has found that differences in how individual brains process reward signals can predict, with meaningful reliability, how strongly a person responds to competitive spectator activities. The degree to which watching other people compete activates your reward system is not entirely a matter of choice or upbringing. It is, in part, a feature of your particular neurology. Your indifference to whether Arsenal beat Spurs on Sunday may be, at least partially, something you were born with. But the more interesting question is not why the football response is absent. It's what the same underlying psychological needs are doing instead. Because the needs are universal. The need for tribal belonging. For shared narrative. For the experience of being part of something larger than yourself. For the emotional intensity of caring deeply about an outcome. These needs exist in every person. In people who don't follow football, they simply find other channels. For some British people who don't care about football, the tribal instinct expresses itself through intense local community attachment, the village, the neighborhood, the institution they have been part of for years. For others it's through music, the subcultures that Britain has produced with extraordinary consistency, from mod to punk to rave to grime, each with its own tribal markings, its own in-group knowledge, its own fierce sense of collective identity. For others it's through class solidarity, political conviction, religious community, or the kind of deep, long-term friendship that functions as chosen family. The belonging is real. The emotional investment is real. The sense of shared identity is real. It just doesn't involve a football ground. Psychologists who study personality and leisure preferences consistently find that people with low sports interest score higher on openness to experience, a dimension associated with intellectual curiosity, aesthetic sensitivity, and engagement with complexity. They are more likely to find deep satisfaction in art, music, literature, ideas, and relationships that require genuine sustained attention. They are less likely to engage in automatic us versus them thinking, less likely to feel hostility toward a group simply because it represents the opposing side. In Britain, this last point has particular resonance. English football culture, and it is worth being precise here, because the relationship between football and identity differs significantly across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, has historically carried a tribalism that extends well beyond sport. The rivalries between certain clubs map onto class divisions, regional identities, religious histories, and political affiliations in ways that create genuine social fractures. The person who doesn't participate in this system is not merely indifferent to sport. They are, in a certain sense, opting out of a particular version of social organization. That opt-out is worth understanding clearly. It is not necessarily a rejection of belonging. It is often a redirection of the same impulse toward different kinds of communities defined by what people share rather than by who they oppose. There is something else specific to the British context that deserves attention. Football in England carries a class history that shapes how non-participation is read. The game was professionalized as a working-class sport in the late 19th century, and that association, however complicated it has become in the era of Premier League billionaires and £60 replica shirts, persists in the cultural imagination. Not following football can still read, in certain social environments, as a kind of middle-class detachment. As the cultural equivalent of not watching soap operas or not reading tabloids, a quiet signal of social distance that people may not intend but that gets received nonetheless. Understanding this history doesn't mean accepting the judgment it implies. But it does explain why not caring about football in Britain feels like more than a simple preference. It feels like a position, even when you never meant it to be one. Now let's talk about what British people who don't follow football actually do with their capacity for deep engagement. Because that capacity doesn't diminish just because football doesn't activate it. Research on flow, the state of complete absorption that psychologists identify as one of the most rewarding experiences available to human beings, consistently demonstrates that it can be achieved through any activity that combines genuine challenge with real skill. The brain in flow does not know whether you're watching a match or reading a novel or playing an instrument or working through a problem that has occupied you for weeks. It just knows it's fully alive. That the noise has stopped. That this is exactly where it wants to be. Britain has always produced people who find their flow somewhere other than a stadium. The literary culture. The music. The art. The comedy, which is, in its finest British forms, a kind of intellectual sport with its own tribal allegiances and its own moments of transcendent brilliance. The pub conversation that goes on long past when it should have ended because something genuine is happening and nobody wants to be the one to break it. The neurological experience of deep engagement is identical regardless of its source. The brain that is fully absorbed in a piece of music it loves, or a book it can't put down, or a problem it's genuinely trying to solve, is having an experience that is neurochemically indistinguishable from the brain of a supporter watching their team in a cup final. The substrate is different. The experience is the same. British people who don't obsess over football are not missing this experience. They are finding it somewhere else, in ways that are entirely their own, in the quietly particular way that Britain has always accommodated people who go their own way without making much of a fuss about it. Here is what the psychology ultimately says about people like you. You are more likely to find meaning in direct participation than in observation. More likely to invest your emotional energy where your engagement genuinely matters, where you are a maker or a thinker or a creator, not a spectator. More likely to build your sense of self from the inside, from your own sustained attention and effort and interest, rather than from the reflected outcomes of other people's performances. In a country where football functions as a near-universal social language, where not speaking it marks you out in ways you didn't choose and can't entirely avoid, finding your meaning elsewhere takes something. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just consistently, privately, in the very British way of simply getting on with what actually matters to you and not requiring anyone else to validate it. You don't need the result. You never did. If this felt like it was written about you, subscribe to British Mind. We do this every week. And if you want to support these deep dives, hit the join button to become a channel member. It's genuinely appreciated.